out earlier in the
Recording in
Maimer
progress.
about how the two levels of everything, there is the two levels in mitzvahs. Because of that, there's two levels of chet, of sin, and what we messed up, and what we're missing, what we're lacking. And then there's also the levels of the two levels, therefore, how it came out in the person's chas shalom, his punishment. And then there is two levels in the tshuva and the comfort that comes about, and that's where it says, נחמו, נחמו ami, in our Haftorah. Among the different things that we said about is that the doubling, the fact that it's called kefil, is because one influences the other. So let's say when there is, by tshuva, we don't just have the level of serving Hashem with naran, with nefesh, ruach, and neshama, but also we are serving Hashem with the levels of chai yechida. But the chai yechida is not something different. You have, okay, now we're serving Hashem with chai yechida, it's doubled. That means chai yechida impacts the level of the avodah of nefesh, ruach, neshama. Going from there, the Rebbe asked, and the same thing is also with luchas rishonis and luchas shniyos, that the breaking of the first luchas and the fact that we are talking about it in this parsha, this week's parsha, it's after the breaking of the luchas. We're still talking about the luchas rishonis, and because those broken luchas are impacting or being impacted by the final luchas as well. So we have again the doubling in the luchas. The Rebbe then connects that this type of connection and impact that one has on the other, the doubling, is to be found in the first and second base of Mikdash as well, which is the idea of the double comfort. That the Chazal say that why is it a double comfort, נחמו, נחמו, because it's since it was Bachei Sivke, since there was a double crying for the first base of Mikdash and the crying for the second base of Mikdash, so there has to be a comfort also, not just for the first base of Mikdash, but there also has to be a comfort for the second base of Mikdash as well. That being said, there has to be this comfort for the second base of Mikdash as well. So the Rebbe asked the Maimer, brought the Maimer from Eter, that once the first base of Mikdash was much greater than the second base of Mikdash. Once we are comforted, once we are consoled for the first base of Mikdash, there's no need to console for the second base of Mikdash, because the first base of Mikdash seemingly had everything that the first base of Mikdash had everything that the second base of Mikdash, and even more. So once Hashem returns to us and consoles us and comforts us for the first base of Mikdash, there's no reason for a second Nachama for the second base of Mikdash. That was the question we left off yesterday from the Maimer נחמו Eter Tafresh Ayin from the Rebbe Rashab. So we're holding, as I said before, page 9, Yud Gimel, in line 5. And he explains, that to be able to understand this, we have to preface initially what the statement of our Chazal is. There were no such Yom Tovim for the Yidden, like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Now the question is, Yom Kippur, okay, it's an amazing day. It's the day that the final luchas were given, like the Gemara speaks about over there. It's called Yom Chasunasai, the wedding day of the Yinan Hashem, because that was the conclusion of what took place with Matan Torah, because the final luchas were given then. But what's the 15th of Av about? Okay, they went, they were looking for the Chassan and Mekalas got together, but why is it such a great Yom Tov? Well, Tamal says so creates Chaim, and the reason for this is brought down in Kabbalah. Then the moon is at its fullest. When you understand, in every 15th of the month, the moon is full. Why don't we find that the 15th of the month is a Yom Tov in other days of the month, except for Pesach and Sukkot, that also happened to coincide with the 15th. When it comes to the 15th of Cheshvan, the 15th of Adar, whatever, there's no Yom Tov then. Specifically, actually 15th of Adar is shush important, but anyway, that why Dafka in the 15th of Av, Azu Yom Tov. From what he says, that there were no Yom Tovim for the Yidden, like the 15th of Av. It's the indications over here that the Yom Tov of the 15th of Av is even greater than all other Yom Tovim. It's even greater than Pesach and Sukkot. That we need to understand this. Why is the 15th of Av such a powerful day that it's even greater than Pesach and Sukkot? And therefore, and just because the moon is full. True, Chassidus brings down that the moon is full has to do and corresponds to the Yidden. And the Yid, we know that the Yidden are likened to the moon, and Yidden's calendar runs by the moon, Mainin Levana. But that doesn't mean that, or if that is so important, like we said before, so then every 15th of the month should be a great and wonderful day. Every 15th of the month should be special, but it's not. So what's so special about the 15th of Av? So he says in line 18, though in the 15th of every month the moon is full, the descent was not so powerful leading up to the 15th of the month. Therefore, the ascent, the elevation that's following it, is also not as powerful. As opposed to the 15th of the Av, that the descent of Tisha B'Av was a very great descent. Obviously, Tisha B'Av is the lowest point in the Jewish calendar. Therefore, Ha'aliyah, the ascent that follows the 15th of Av, Higam Kim B'Yoser, is also unbelievably so much more so. That's why the 15th of Av, in and of itself, it qualifies for a Yom Tov. And even those other Yom Tovim that are on the 15th, he's greater than and it's greater even than all the Yom Tovim, even from Pesach and Sukkot. Now the Rebbe is going to go a step further. We know, it says in the Gemara, so seemingly one would say that the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur are on the same level. So the Rebbe says a step further. Even between the two of them, that the Gemara says, Yom is even greater. The Rebbe says in the brackets, that the ascent of the 15th of Av is considered even greater than Yom Kippur. Even though, to a certain degree, Yom Kippur was also a result of a negative thing. Yom Kippur came about, every year it has to do with the forgiveness for sins, and all those sins began with the Chet HaEgel, and that's what Yom Kippur came for. It was the final culmination after the Chet HaEgel. But as we know, Yom Kippur is related to Sukkot. This Chach of Sukkah is a result and extension of the cloud of the incense offering that was brought in the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur. So, since Yom Kippur is connected with Sukkot, so the Rebbe by extension says, since the 15th of Av is higher than the Sukkot, therefore it's even higher than Yom Kippur. And this is also the hemshech of the Lashon and the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't say, Yom Tovim Yisrael ki Yom Kippur v'chamish asar b'Av. Shouldn't he say first something min HaTorah and then say the Rabbanon for next? No, the 15th of Av has even an advantage over Yom Kippur. So, based on this idea, This to explain, based on what the Rebbe Rashab explained in the Pri Eitz Chaim about why the 15th of the month of Av is so significant. He's also explaining the double nechama of the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, that even for the second base of Mikdash you need a consolation, though you've been consoled for the first base of Mikdash. So the Rebbe says 3 lines at the bottom. According to this, he explains also concerning the first and second base of Mikdash, it was insufficient being comforted for the first base of Mikdash. Though it was in a much higher level than the second base of Mikdash. Like we asked at the beginning of this Ois top of page Yudalit. There's within 200 is already 100. If you're already consoled for the first base of Mikdash, it should be included also consolation for the second base of Mikdash. Still in all, then during the destruction of the first base of Mikdash, it wasn't such a great descent. Therefore, it was insufficient with being comforted just with נחמו on the first base of Mikdash. Concerning this, it says, comfort twice. Al Bayis Rishon, Val Bayis Sheni. Again, the Churban Bayis Rishon was only a 70-year Golus. The Churban Bayis Sheni is such a longer Golus. That means the Yerida of the second destruction is so much greater than the Yerida of the first destruction. So just being consoled for the first destruction, the first base of Mikdash, is not going to be enough, because we need to have an aliyah that corresponds to how great the Yerida is. So even though on the one hand, yes, the first base of Mikdash was higher and greater than the second base of Mikdash, but the descent was not so low. So you need to have a totally different type of nechama, a totally different type of aliyah, a totally different type of consolation for the second base of Mikdash. So the Rebbe asks, if so then why the first base of Mikdash then? Forget about the first base of Mikdash. You're going to have an aliyah after the great descent of the second base of Mikdash. That should be enough. So instead of what he asked before about the first base of Mikdash should have been enough to console you, now he's going to ask the opposite way. Line 5. According to this, it's not understood. On the other hand, the Kivin Shadavke B'chorban Bayis Sheni Hoysei Yedida B'Yoser, since specifically the destruction of the second base of Mikdash was a great descent, or an even greater descent than the first base of Mikdash. Therefore, the ascent will be so much greater. Therefore, it's sufficient, the idea that we are comforted on the second base of Mikdash. What is the need to console and comfort us also for the first base of Mikdash? So here comes the idea about one impacting the other. The double that we spoke about, that it's a combination. So he answers a line, it's end of line 9, Nachabir Bezebel explanation in this is, through the comfort and consolation for the second base of Mikdash. So then the advantage and quality and ascent is added also in the first base of Mikdash. It's similar to what we said previously in Sifhei. Through the final luchas, even the early luchas, the first luchas, are added as well to them, and that's why there is a double issue, because of the two luchas that there are. A double, the doubling of that he's talking about throughout this whole sugya. Line 14, Oizayin. This is all going back to Maimer, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe is talking about. Pirish Radak, that the Radak explains about נחמו Ami, Shekol Elo and Nechamis, all of these comforts, Asidois, this is all going to be Limois HaMashiach, that all the entire intention is that the consolation will take place with Mashiach's coming. Like the Friedrich Rebbe concludes in his Yaamer, because of the true consolation and comfort will be in the coming of Mashiach soon. The Rebbe always emphasizes, based on what Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that all revelations of Mashiach's times are dependent on our actions and our service now. The preparation for all of these consolations is the avoid of doing tshuva. And that's also connected with Mashiach's time. So this is also the idea that Mashiach is going to come to bring tzaddikim to do tshuva. The idea behind this is in the coming of Mashiach will be fulfilled the promise and what's foretold, I will transform their mourning to rejoicing. What is the preparation for Hashem doing a transformation? Through our avodah of transformation as well. What is the avodah of transformation? Tshuva is the avodah of transformation. That's the advantage and quality of the avodah bal tshuva over the avodah of tzaddikim. The avodah of tzaddikim does not affect and cause the idea of transformation concerning all matters that they are imprisoned and bound up in the hands of klippos. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that things that come from Shlosh Ksat Meis, they are called asur from the word bound up and imprisoned, because they cannot be elevated. So a tzaddik cannot elevate those things that are in Shlosh Ksat Meis, non-kosher food, other non-kosher activities. That a tzaddik's avodah in those things that are asur, those things that are bound up, prohibited, is only by pushing them away. That's the only avodah a tzaddik can do with them. As opposed to through tshuva, in his doinus is that the intentional sins becomes like merits, mamish, until actual mitzvahs, merits, explained in Tanya. Therefore, only tshuva has the advantage of a sabcha. Top of page through the avodah of tshuva that affects the transformation of intentional sins to merits, so that because we do transformation, we do the turning it around, so therefore Hashem also does in turn the transformation, the turning around, sadness to rejoicing. I don't know if the Rebbe says this anywhere else, but it would seemingly, it would come out that what tzaddikim would only affect is the erasing of the negative, because that's their way of dealing with negative. That's their way of dealing with Avedis. They push it away. They remove it. So therefore, what they would cause in the future is only that the sad days go away. Tisha B'Av is gone. Shvas B'Tam is gone, etc., etc. But since their avodah does not involve transformation, it won't turn Tisha B'Av into a Yom Tov. Comes the avodah of the Baal Tshuva, since in their lives they are transforming and elevating the negative to good, the zdoinus nasla kizachis, so that causes in turn Hashem not just removing the negative, removing the sadness of Tisha B'Av, removing the sadness of mourning, but taking the very mourning itself, taking the very sadness itself, and making it into sasan and simcha, making it into joy. Now, he's going to bring it back to the idea of Chamish Asar B'Av, the great Yom Tov. Why there's no greater of the simcha as Chamish Asar B'Av, top of page 2, top of page Tesvav, line 2. This is also the idea of the 15th of Av. This Shabbos, with this is emphasized the transformation of the great descent below. Only through transforming the descent down here below do we reach the ultimate ascent. Like we said before, in the Yaamer from נחמו of Tov Reish Ayin of the Rebbe Rashab, that specifically the second base of Mikdash was a greater destruction, and therefore the ascent and the נחמו and the comfort that we are going to gain after that happens after and following on the heels of the destruction of the second base of Mikdash is greater even than the first, and it will impact even the first as elevation. Second paragraph, line 7. So the Rebbe points out an interesting nuance in this Yaamer, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that he's basing this Yaamer on, about the whole topic of Yerida Tzorech Aliyah that's always spoken about throughout Chassidus. So the Rebbe says, to note, Yaamer and this Yaamer, the Frierdiker Rebbe, yesh chidush l'gabe shara makom shebehem nisbayer shekol Yerida. There's a novel and an interesting idea over all the other places that it explains about that the descent is for the sake, every descent is for the sake of an ascent. And we speak about that as great, the greater the descent is, the greater the ascent is. So he says, what is the Chiddush over here? What is the novelty in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Yaamer? This idea that because the great descent very low, there has to be an ascent very high. It also could be in a way of you don't go right away to the topmost level. It was a descent. And now, because of this great descent, you got to climb out and higher and higher and higher. And eventually, sometime down the road, that investment is going to pay off. You don't invest into something to get the returns right away. That investment will pay off 10 years down the line. Talking about monetary investments. In Ruchnius, it's also long, has to be stages and stages. And the Rebbe says that seemingly there's a medrash that seems to indicate this as well. It seems to indicate this also in the Psikta, that the Psikta speaks about the different beginnings of the Haftarahs in the coming weeks, from now till ultimately Shabbos Shuvah. And the way the Psikta explains it, it's all step by step. After Hashem tells his Nevi'im, you, my Nevi'im, I want you to be the ones to comfort my nation. That's the way the Psikla learns Pshat in this week's Haftarah. So the Nevi'im go back and they say to Hashem, you know what, the Yidden are not accepting this consolation. Yאmar, like it says, the poor one was not comforted. And the Nevi'im go back to Hashem, that's not going to work. They don't want from us the comfort. Then the Eibishter returns and says, I'll do the comfort. Don't you, נחמו, you go ahead and comfort you, the Nevi'im, I'll do the comforting. Like it's explained in Sfarim, in Avodraham, why these Haftarahs were actually arranged in this way. The Psikta doesn't talk about the order of the Haftarahs, but the Avodraham, based on this Psikta, says this is why this is the order. First we say נחמו, then the next week's Haftarah, Shabbos Vat Shekev, is going to be on the Asoira. Then following that, there's the Haftarah of Anochi and Noichi. Shabbos Lachrei, plus these are the Haftarahs of the 7 Shabbosim of consolation. That Shabbos Achrei plus the Parnusa, they come after the 3 Haftarahs of rebuke and of punishment. Until ultimately, eventually, Shabboim LaHaftarah the Shuvi Yisrael Sheyachas Shuvi Yom Kippurim. The utmost, the highest level. Finally, after working our way up, we come to Shuvi Yisrael, Hashem Elkecha. That has to do with the ultimate return, the return of Yom Kippur. That is all before we learn this Yaamer, the Frierdiker Rebbe. according to what's explained in this Maimer, that the advantage of Tu B'Av and the quality of Tu B'Av is because the great descent of Tisha B'Av. Move on, it's understood. It's understood that the ascent is in a way that's incomparable, without any order, without any type of step-by-step process. Immediately, Tisha B'Av, right afterwards is Tu B'Av. No other Yom Tov like Tu B'Av. Immediately after the great descent of Tisha B'Av, 6 days later, you come to the advantage of the 15th of Av. Yom Tov Gadol Yosar Fil on Pesach Sukkos. It's a greater Yom Tov than Pesach Sukkos. The Rebbe concludes with the bracha because the Nasai Devoid Tshuva. All this is accomplished through avoid of Tshuva. Okay, psakt in the Rambam, like the ruling of the Rambam, and Yisrael Negolim al B'Tshuva, Yidden will only be redeemed through Tshuva. Kfar Ifticha Torah, Shasav Yisrael Las Tshuva, Sav Gelusam Yaden Negolim, and Torah promised that eventually the Yidden will do Tshuva at the end of their exile, and immediately they'll become redeemed. Miyadai, specifically immediately. L'loy Menias V'Yikuvim V'Akbol Seder Ishtalshus, without any delays and obstacles and limitations of the whole chain order of descent. Just like the general idea of tshuva is beyond all boundaries. Because through one thought of tshuva in his heart, he becomes immediately a tzaddik, like it's brought down in the laws of Kiddushin, until a complete tzaddik, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. That when we use the term tzaddik, we're using the highest term of description. It's not tzaddik versus Baal Tshuva. Like I said before, that through tshuva becomes the fulfillment of what's foretold, that will transform their sadness and mourning to rejoicing. That these days will be transformed to rejoicing and happiness and to Yom Tovim. Like it's brought down the Medrashim Sheyomim Elu, that these days shall leim namar v'afachti evlom l'sosn, that concerning them it says, I will transform their mourning to rejoicing. Yehavchu liyis moedim hayoser g'dolim. They don't want us to be a Yom Tov on the same level like other Yom Tovim, Pesach, Sukkot, whatever, Shavuos. It'll be even the greatest Yom Tovim, even greater than them. That will be the true consolation and the innermost consolation and the general consolation of Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Karv Mamish, in the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu soon Mamish.